I grew up in Houston, little bitty town in Texas. We moved to Houston right before the Houston Oilers left town and went to Tennessee to become the Tennessee Titans. And we had come from Dallas, so we were a big sports fans. I'm still a Cowboys fan. And it was easy to be a Cowboys fan when there was no other football team in Houston when the Oilers left. And we were down there, and I love sports, and so, we didn't get to cheer, for a lot of things, but that was in the heyday of the Houston Rockets. I know they're in the heyday now again. But back then, it was Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon and Clyde the Glide Drexler. And the Rockets had just acquired Charles Barkley, and so it was, they won their two series, their two championships while we were there. It was the 2 years Michael Jordan wasn't in there, but that doesn't matter. Championship's a championship. And so they won, and it was fantastic, and I've still got a Hakeem Olajuwon jersey hanging in my closet at my parents' house. I guess it's technically not my closet anymore, right? If the kid moves out, it's not their room, but it's the room that I stayed in when I was a child. And so it's there. But during that same period of time, they had a baseball team in Houston, the Astros. And the Astros have made news recently, but back then they were horrible, terrible. But they had a really cool stadium. And I cheered for the Astros, and I cheered for the Rangers, because I was from Dallas and had moved to Houston, and at that time they weren't in the same league, so it was easy to cheer for them because they never played each other. You had the National League Astros and the American League Rangers, so they never came together, so you could cheer for each one. And so we cheered for the Astros, but they never won. You were hopeful that they were going to win, but you knew they never were. And so we would go to the Astrodome, even though the Astrodome is in a terrible condition today. It's just nasty. But back then it was not as nasty, but it was still there. And we would go and we'd watch the games. I even have a baseball from the final season of the Astrodome. On the opening day of that season, they gave baseballs to everybody in the stadium. And why that stands out in my memory is because the Astros did so bad during the game, half the people in the stadium threw their baseballs on the field during the sixth inning. I kept mine because, as a kid, it's free baseball. You're going to keep it. And so saw the Astrodome, got to go and watch all that, and then they built a new park in downtown, and it's really neat. They've got a building right across the street that you can go and you can buy tickets to the rooftop of the building and watch the game from right across the street on that building. And they've got all kinds of snacks over there because the outfield is all glass, and they open the roof halfway through the game and you can see, and it's really neat. Well, this past year, obviously, the Astros did great. They did exceptional. They won the World Series. And for someone who grew up cheering for the Astros, this is something that never happened. We never thought that would happen. I mean, you could go to the game you can't do this anymore now because they've raised ticket prices, but you could pay $1, get in the game. You could pay $1 on dollar hot dog night, and you could get 2 hot dogs because they were just trying to get people in the stadium because they were so bad, nobody would come. And so it was great. You can't do that anymore because they won the World Series. And what happens when you win the World Series? Prices go up astronomically. And so it was just cool to watch the Astros do so great and so phenomenal. Well, my family's big sports fans, and they go to Astros games periodically as they can. But I got a text this week about something very interesting. My sister went to a game the other night. She actually went to that roof. She bought one of those tickets to the rooftop deal across the street. And the host of that section, had something special. And I got a picture here. I'm going to show you my sister at this game. That's one of the championship rings she's wearing on her finger. You know why that's unique? Something happened that I've never heard of happening. The owner of the Astros is so in love with the Astros and Houston and his employees that he didn't just buy championship rings for the players and the coaches and the trainers. He bought 1,300 championship rings, one for every employee of the Astros. The section leaders, the janitors, the mowers, the guys who take tickets, everybody got a ring for the Astros. And you can know over the years, some of these guys have worked for the Astros for decades, and they had always hoped the Astros would win, but they never believed they would. So even the guys who believed they would always lose got a ring, got a championship ring. And so I thought that was one of the coolest things in the world. These guys who have put in their dues and done all of this got the same ring that the guy on the field who makes $25 million a year gets. And these guys are just doing their daily deal every day, working hard, cheering on the team they know is going to lose, but they cheer them on anyway. And then the team does great and wins. Even though they didn't believe they would win, they win, and they get rewarded by the owner. Well, today we're going to look at something unique, something about God. God has that same kind of heart that we may at times doubt God, doubt God's ability, doubt what God can do, but he still gives us the opportunity, even if we doubt, to accept him. He gives that opportunity to all of humanity, even those who are actively working against him. He gives them the same opportunity to believe that he gives me and you. Everybody gets the same opportunity to believe, from the lowest to the greatest, from those who've been in church since before they were born to those who come to believe the second before they die. Everyone gets the same opportunity to believe in Jesus. But there are still some who do not believe that God exists, who do not believe that God created the world. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's where the Bible starts. That is the foundation stone of everything. If there is no God to create the world, then there is no world that gets created, and there is no us, and there is no Jesus. That's what we believe. We believe that God exists, but there are some who don't believe Genesis 1:1. Same people don't believe John chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, the Word being Jesus. Jesus was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that has been made. And so there are people in the world, some probably in this room, to be honest with you, who don't fully buy into what those scriptures say, that God created the world. There are skeptics who don't believe those scriptures or don't believe even in other scriptures. But we're going to explore several different avenues today that not only talk about the existence of God, but I would say prove the existence of God. From what we can determine, there's about 7 different avenues that we can look at, and we're going to hit 2 of them today. One is philosophy, prove the existence of God. The other one is science, because there's a whole lot of people who would say science is in direct opposition to belief in God, and they cannot come together. But what we can see in Scripture is that God and science aren't in opposition. God created the foundation of science, and so science has to agree with God. And we're going to look at that. But we're going to start with philosophy, because belief in the existence of God really comes down to proof and evidence. Can God be proven to exist? For some of us, that's a scary question. We don't want to go there, because we've watched those History Channel specials, we've watched those TLC specials, we've watched those A&E specials, and it scares us to really go down this road, because there's some really smart people who don't believe in God, and they list off this and they list off that, and we don't know how to counter any of it. But there's not just really smart people who don't believe in God. There's really smart people who do. You see, when we look at both ancient and modern philosophy and science, they give a resounding yes to the question, can God be proven to exist? We see it in the lives of many people throughout history, through the ancient, through a guy like Immanuel Kant or Alvin Plantinga or Plato, or even in the last 100 years in C.S. Lewis, who was an atheist, who was a brilliant philosopher, but was converted to believe in God, to believe in Jesus. He wrote, speaking of philosophy, he wrote, "The existence of morality itself is a base proof of God." The existence of morality proves that there is a God. Now, he goes on to expound on that using very big words. I don't know if you've ever read C.S. Lewis. Sometimes you have to read a page 3 or 4 times to really try to wrap your head around what he's trying to say, and even then, you can't really do it, and you just got to move on and say, I've already read that page 5 times. It's time to go to the next page. But he wrote that in his book, Mere Christianity. You see, what morality is in what C.S. Lewis is saying there is that it is a proof of God, because morality that we all have, that we all possess, that we grow up having, it's just built into us. In a sense, it's like we all know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, cutting in line is wrong. We know that there is fairness, and if this person, if we're growing up and we're brothers and sisters and we have our siblings and, this sibling gets a cookie, it's only fair if this sibling gets a cookie. It's fairness. We know that there is fairness. There has to be fairness. It's built into us. We know that taking turns, that's just only fair. It's part of the deal. That equality exists, that right exists, that wrong exists, that there must be justice in the world. And when there is injustice, something built into us, hardwired into our guts, screams that's injustice and not right. It's just built into us. But at what point did we all agree that something was not just? At what point did we all agree that cutting in line was wrong? At what point in the history of human existence did that develop? Well, Christians will say that concept of fairness and equality and justice and morality and right and wrong, Christians will say that kind of thing comes from God, that He is the standard by which we judge all right and wrong. But skeptics will disagree with that. Skeptics will say that morals are simply a product of an enlightened culture. That the more enlightened we get, the morals have developed out of that culture, and so the morals of today may shift and grow and become something else tomorrow because culture will change. But at the same time, the culture that I grew up with in South Houston is different than the culture that some of you grew up with. So does that mean that I have different morals than you, that the morals I have are any more right than the morals you have because our culture is different? But that follows this line of thinking. Because if we say that morals develop out of an enlightened culture, even though our cultures may be different, then we must say that cultural context for you is different from me, and that's okay. So if we say then that morals grew from culture instead of morals, transcend and supersede culture, that if morals grew from culture, then if your morals are different than mine, then I have to say that's fine. I have to say that's okay. Because if that's what I'm saying, then I would say there's no standard, there's no greater right and wrong. There is just what you believe and what I believe, and we've got to be okay with that. There is all this random morals then that people would have, but if you really think about it, that doesn't make any sense. Does it make any sense that, Stephen would have a set of morals and I would have a set of morals and they don't line up? And if they don't line up and my morals clash with his morals and I think it's morally okay to steal his car, but he does not think that's morally okay, but that doesn't matter because it's morally okay for me to steal his car. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to do that. I won't steal your car. I don't know. Yeah, he said you can have it. There you go. You see, there must be a standard of morality. Because if we say there's not, and it's okay for you to have different morals than me, then nobody's view on any particular subject would be right. We would have to say nobody's view on abortion is wrong. Nobody's view on immigration is wrong. That nobody's view on pollution or the environment is wrong. That nobody's view on different races is wrong. If your morals are different than my morals and that's okay, then everybody's view has to be okay, and I have to be okay with that fact. And I don't know about you, but I've encountered a lot of people who say it's okay to have different morals, but they're really not okay with that. If you really get down to the base root of it, they're not okay that we disagree. They think that they're absolutely right in some of the positions and political opinions they have. And they will argue till they're blue in the face and want to punch your nose off. So even though they may say it's okay for you to have different morals than me, when they're arguing so passionately about the thing, it's not really okay for them. Because there is a standard of morality. You see, if we think that there's not a standard and that it's okay to have different morals, then we really can't care what somebody else believes, but in truth, we really do. Because at the base root of it all, we all know it's morally wrong to punch a baby. If you don't, we have a problem. We know that's wrong. We know that it's wrong to murder an innocent person. We know that's wrong. It's within us. That goes all the way back, if you even look just at Scripture, to when there were only 4 people in existence in the world, and Cain and Abel had a problem with each other. One of them ends up murdering the other one, and without any previous knowledge that murder is wrong, he tries to cover it up because he knows within his heart it is. Because there's a standard that exists. There has to be an absolute right. There has to be a standard by which we judge all that we do, right and wrong. Now, you don't have to believe in God to believe in right and wrong. But your lack of belief in God does not make him any less real, as is proved by the very fact that you believe that there is a standard of right and wrong. You see, but you may say, or a skeptic may say, well, if I believe in a right and wrong and you believe in a right and wrong, but I still don't believe in God, why do some of us, disagree about the boundaries of morality? Why do I agree about one kind of morality and you think of another kind of morality? Why don't our moralities line up? Why don't our morals line up? That doesn't jive with the standard of morality. Well, the truth is, yeah, it still does. Because there can still be a standard even if you don't agree with its boundaries. Just because you get an answer wrong in math class, that doesn't mean that addition itself is wrong. It just means that the person got the answer wrong. It's user error, not an error in the system. Philosophically, going back to ancient days all the way up to modern times, philosophically, God must exist. Now, scientifically, science is very interesting. That's what makes a lot of us nervous, because these people go on TV and have their arguments and make their case, and they always, I don't know if you've ever noticed, they always get the guy who's an atheist, who has all of the doctorates and PhDs and all the letters after his name, and it seems like they get the Christian who's the bumpkin and up there, and they get them to argue, and you're like, well, of course, I'm going to agree with that guy because it makes the most sense, and this guy doesn't make any sense. But science is not in opposition to God, because science tells us that one single cell of any living thing has the entire DNA of the whole thing within it. So what we see in that fact is that structured, ordered, complex information fills every single cell of every single living thing, right down to a single strand of DNA. Now, a single strand of DNA, that's the reason I have this giant book up here. A single strand of DNA contains within it enough information to fill 30 of these. One strand of DNA has enough information to fill 30 of these. 30 of these. And every single cell in every single living thing has that much information in it. This blew my mind. The average human being, average-sized human being, okay? The average human has 3.2 trillion cells. And every single one of those cells can fit or can hold 30 worth of these. Structured, complex, ordered information. Now, what science also tells us from its vast history of knowledge is that complex, structured, intelligible information cannot, it is impossible to spring forth out of randomness. If something is that structured and that ordered, it does not come from randomness. It has to come from something specific to order the thing together. I mean, if we're walking down the road and we see a tree branch lying on the road, we can come to the conclusion, well, that must have fallen off. We can look at it and we can say, okay, there's jagged edges. Oh, there's a tree where it fell off by itself. That's random. It just happened. But if we're walking down the road and we see a watch lying on the road, we're not liable to say, well, that watch just fell like that and just sprang forth out of nothingness. And there it is. It's amazing. It happened all by itself. No, we see ordered, structured. We see it's informative. Someone had to create this and put it together. But we can also look at it and say, take apart all the pieces of this watch. Let's conservatively say there's 50 pieces here with all the stuff on the inside. There may be more, but let's just say there's 50 pieces to this watch. And you laid out all 50 pieces here. And you say, well, somebody has to come along and put those together. Somebody has to compile all of that because it's obviously structured and it's obviously ordered and it has to fit together in a certain way in order for it to work. And that's just 50 pieces. That's not talking about 30 of these in 37.2 trillion cells of a human being, not to mention all the other things that exist in our world that are living and breathing. You see, odds, this is fascinating, odds of a finely tuned universe like ours, odds of a finely tuned universe coming to exist out of stuff that already exists, we'll just say that. I mean, never mind, somebody had to exist to create the stuff to exist in order for the stuff to, whatever. The odds of a finely tuned universe like ours coming to exist out of stuff that already exists, as it does now, are 1 in 10 to the 138th power. Is that number up there? Yeah. So 10 with 138 zeros after it. That's the odds of a bunch of random stuff coming together and creating what we have today. You know what mathematics tells us? Mathematicians will tell you those odds are impossible. Not improbable, not unlikely. They will say, mathematicians will tell you that is impossibility. It means it's not going to happen. It cannot happen. It's too out there, too incredible. But skeptics will come to you and say, well, there's a lot of theories. We'll try to work this out. There's what's called the lucky us theory. Well, then the universe that we have is that one. We are the one in all of that. It was lucky us, all this stuff combined to make it what it happens today. But I read a guy who was a skeptic, who was an atheist, who didn't believe. His name was Mark Clark. He had a great illustration. A pack of cards here. Don't question why the pastor has a pack of cards. Cards are not evil and bad. Although I did learn how to play all kinds of card games on church trips as a kid. But in a pack of cards, you got all these cards. If you're playing poker, all right? Now, I'm going to get emails. I'm not condoning stuff that happens with poker and whatever and so forth and gambling and either. I'm just saying, this is an illustration. Don't take it wherever you need to take it. Let's just say you're playing poker. And not you, somebody else, some heathen is playing poker, okay? And you're playing poker, and in your hand of poker, you get a royal flush. 10, jack, queen, king, ace. Man, you're like, man, I've got a royal flush, that's fantastic, lucky me. You play the next hand, and you get another one. You play the next hand, and you get another one. Everybody at the table is going to start to think that you cheated. But let's say you get that many hands for 10 to the 138th power. That's random. That's incredible. But by the second hand that it happens, everyone's going to think you cheated because it's impossible. And the odds against it are astronomical. Unbelievable. Chance and happy accidents are not a rational explanation for really anything with those kind of odds. Concerning the existence of God, we want the most rational explanation. That's the one we're looking for. But another skeptic might try to explain those odds and that kind of thinking and say, well, maybe that 10 to the 138th power, maybe it's what they call the multiverse theory, the multiple universes. That, universe happened and it was created and it couldn't be developed and, life could not spring forth, so it collapsed and so on and so on. It kept happening and kept happening and kept happening until we got to the universe we have now, to where we became the 1 in 10 to the 138th power. Well, even really smart guys, really smart guys, even the guys that they pull out for these arguments, begin to say, well, that really doesn't jive. Because in order for that to happen, a universe that would spring up, in order for it to then collapse, it could not be expanding outward. It could not be expanding. It would have to, be created. It would have to, have a beginning, and then it would have to implode and collapse in order for the next one to happen. And what they began to see from a guy who saw it through his little telescope, a guy named Hubble, notice something. It would seem that the universe isn't collapsing on itself, is forever expanding. And so these guys begin to adjust their theory, and there was even one who's a renowned atheist. He's one that they call on more than any other. His name is Richard Dawkins. Dawkins explains that this multiverse theory really couldn't happen because the universe seems to be expanding, and so this infinite number of universe theory, it would need the universe to collapse inward, and it doesn't. It goes outward, and so he says, so that one really doesn't work. So it's not a lucky us theory. The odds are too crazy. It's not an infinite number of universe theory. And so it would seem that all of the evidence, philosophical, scientific, are pointing us in one direction. And so if we decide to choose not to believe, it's because we're choosing not to believe, not because the evidence led us down that path. The evidence seems to lead us towards the existence of God, to something that existed beforehand. Even some of these guys and their belief in the way the earth was created, or the universe was created, there still had to be somebody there who created the stuff that created the universe. But they're not willing, even then, still to acknowledge that maybe that is the God we're talking about. You see, this Dawkins, this Richard Dawkins guy, this atheist, he still even admits to some sort of pre-existence. He says he doesn't really know what it was that existed beforehand, but he chooses to believe that it's not God. He says, well, it can't be God because I don't believe in God. He says the evidence may point to that, but I don't really believe that it is. Even another one, a guy who passed away recently, Stephen Hawking. He's an astrophysicist, an admitted atheist. He made this statement. He said, the odds against a universe like ours are enormous, and yet there must be some sort of religious implications. He says if you look at it, if you look at the complication, this guy who studied the universe, if you look at all of it, it all seems to point towards some sort of creator. But he still said, but I really don't want to believe in one. He says, yeah, there probably is, but I do not want to believe in it. So they chose not to believe, even though that's where the evidence led them. Ultimately, evidence points directly to an intelligent creator. And so then we choose to believe in that creator or not. It's up to us whether we believe in it or not, whether we take a fully faith stance and believe in it on faith, or we take an evidence stance, a proof stance, and that still leads us down that path to a creator. But there are some who choose to ignore the mountain of evidence that points to God, and then in doing so, that creates all sorts of moral and philosophical and scientific problems. In spite of the evidence, you still can, like Hawking and Dawkins, you still can choose not to believe, but it is your choosing not to believe. You see, in the end of it all, atheism is a belief system. It's not based on the actual evidence. It's a deliberate choice to turn away from the evidence and believe something else. And God wrote about this through the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 1, verse 19. The Apostle Paul wrote, what can be known about God is plain to them, to everyone, to people in this world, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived, and ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. He says we as humanity don't have any excuse to not believe in God because God put evidence everywhere. And we just saw a few elements of that evidence. I mean, I've got more and more books on my shelf, and I read a bunch of articles in prep for this, and there's all kinds of evidence that point to God. And we have just cracked the surface of all of that evidence. And Paul writes here from the inspiration of the Holy Spirit that God planted all of that evidence out there for us to see it and turn to him. So we are without excuse if we say, I don't believe in God, because he put the evidence everywhere for us to believe in him. But everything that we can know about God is knowable because of what he has put out there. Even though God is spirit, Jesus tells us that in John chapter 4, God is spirit, and we can't see spirit. Spirit is unseeable, it's invisible. And so what we can know about God is invisible. But anything that really can be known about him can be known through what he has created, through what he has done, through the visible. We can know the invisible God through the visible creation. We can know the invisible God because of the visible creation. The invisible makes the visible visible. Without the invisible God, the visible would be invisible. You catch all those visibles there? I had to really think about how I phrased those. You see, God isn't hiding himself from anybody. He's never hiding himself and saying, oh, I'm going to hide. See if you can find me. I'm over here. You got to, follow the map to get to the secret X to find where I'm at. No, God put himself out there in all kinds of ways for everyone to see, fully exposing himself if people would simply see it and believe. He wants every person to come to know him. but you have to experience him for yourself. You can't force somebody else to believe as much as you might want to, as much as you would like to just beat them in the head with the Bible and say, here, that's enough, now you believe. If that's all it took, we'd be chunking Bibles all over the place. That's why the Gideons make them, in small packages so you can chunk them real easy. I'm just playing. That's not real. Don't do that. Don't throw Bibles at people. Again, I'm foreseeing emails I'm going to receive this week. You can't force somebody else to believe. God put the evidence everywhere, so much so that you have to intentionally look the other way to miss it. And we saw that with those guys, Richard Dawkins and Stephen Hawking. What Paul says there, we are without excuse. We have to believe, and if we don't believe, it's on us. We're held accountable for what we believe. Because in choosing to not believe, in choosing to sin, we ultimately violate our very purpose. And our purpose is to have a relationship with God. And so God then does something unique. And he mentions it in Romans chapter 1 in 3 places. He says, if you choose not to believe and you choose to walk away and you choose to ignore the signs, God is going to do something. And he says it 3 times in Romans chapter 1. First, in verse 24, God says, God gave them up. God gave them up. Then in 2 verses later, verse 26, he says again, exact same wording, God gave them up. And then again in verse 28, God gave them up. He says it 3 times. It's very important. If God says anything, it's very important. But if he says it 3 times, that's for emphasis, that's for power. He says, God gave them up. They chose not to believe. They chose to follow their own way. They chose to ignore what God put out there. And so God gave them up. And so we're held accountable for what we choose and what we believe. You see, God gave us up because we gave up on him. But giving someone up is not the same as giving up on them. Giving someone up is not the same as giving up on them. God didn't give up on us. He didn't give up on us. As humanity, when we chose not to believe, he gave us up. You see, giving someone up is allowing them to experience the consequences of their decisions. We do that with our kids all the time. You allow them to experience it on occasion, the consequences of their decisions, because that's how they learn better than you simply just saying it. And so you give them up to learn, okay, that is a bad thing. If I run in the mud, I'm going to slip and fall. I'm going to get muddy. Of course, they may like it, but this is going to happen because of that. This is going to happen because of that. We try to protect them and try to keep them protected, but at some point, we got to let them out and experience what they experience and make the decisions they make. And then they will have to go through those consequences. But when it says there, God gave them up, because we gave up on him. There's a word there he uses. And he uses it at the same time in all 3 places. I'm going to teach you a Greek word, all right? The word that Paul uses there is paradidomi. Everybody say para. Everybody say didomi. Let's say it together. Paradidomi. That means to give one up, to hand one over, to surrender authority or rights. Paradidomi. There it is in English. Where I guess you can, pronounce it. Paradidomi. To give one up. And we do that on occasion. God could not prevent us from sinning, because to do so would be taking away our free will. And if God takes away our free will, then there is no love, because love is a decision, love is a choice that God wants us to make in order to believe in him. And so if love ceases to exist, because free will ceases to exist, then the very basis of our purpose disappears. Our purpose is to love God and live for him. And so we must then choose to love God, the essence of why he created us. So he leaves free will intact, but in leaving free will intact, that means at some point we will choose to go the other way. We will choose to walk away from him. We will, on occasion, as collectively humanity, give up on him. And so God will then, as he says there, give us up. But something very interesting happens. You know, these letters of the New Testament, like the letter to the Romans here, are not meant to be read in just pieces. The Apostle Paul wrote this, and it was supposed to be read in front of the church, the entire thing to the church in Rome. And so he starts off in a place in Romans chapter 1 and builds his letter all the way to the end. Well, he says something very fascinating that takes what he said in chapter 1 and lays it out in Romans chapter 8, verse 32. You see, God did not give up on us. Romans 8:32. He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all. He gave him up, just like he gave them up in Romans 1:24, 1:26, 1:28. He gave them up in Romans 8:32. He gave Jesus up. What word do you think is he using there? Paradidomi. Exact same word. He gave Jesus up for us. You see, God did not give up on us. God gave his son up for us. He saw the predicament we were in. We were choosing our own sin. We were choosing to walk away from him. Some of us even choosing not to believe in him. And so even in the midst of not believing, he still sent his son to die for us, so that no one would be beyond hope. No one would be beyond belief. Even those who refuse to believe have the opportunity to believe because Jesus died for all humanity. So everyone could have him. Everyone could believe if only they would. You see, God is on your side. He's not fighting against you, rooting against you. On the contrary, God is rooting for you to succeed. God is rooting for you to find victory, but that can only be found in Jesus. That can only be found by following him. You see, sending Jesus shows how committed God is to helping you win. God isn't going to leave you out there stranded by yourself to walk through this life without any help or any aid or any strength or any power. He sent Jesus to bring you to where you need to be. But you've got to believe in him. You've got to accept his gift. You've got to accept his commitment. You've got to accept what he's doing. Don't you know every single one of those 1,300 employees for the Houston Astros, none of them said, "I never thought we would win. I don't want that ring." No, none of them said that. When the owner's handing out the ring, they say, "Absolutely, give me that thing full of diamonds. I'm taking that puppy home." Every one of them believed when they were given the opportunity. They could have refused, yes, they could have, but they would have been crazy to. It's how much more so then is the gift of eternity crazy to turn down, crazy to walk away from. If even those who will say, "I don't believe in God, but he's probably there." Famous atheists who've made millions of dollars off of books saying God is not real, will still in the middle of the book say, "But maybe he is." They're they have no hope for eternity. And they're saying, "Maybe I'm wrong." I don't know about you, but I'm not going to base my eternity on a maybe I'm wrong at all. If we're talking about odds, I'm going to put my chips in the basket of the one who says, "Yes, you can have eternity." It's easier, I think, to believe that one God created everything, sent his one son to die and raise for all of humanity. It takes more faith to believe in the odds being 1 to 10 to the 138th power. It takes more faith to believe that could happen than God created the world. And yet some of the guys who believe in that will say, "Well, I have no faith." You're wrong. You're wrong. God exists, God sent Jesus, and God wants all of us to find victory in this life, but that can only be found if we believe in Jesus, if we follow Jesus. You have to choose to believe in God's love through Jesus, and then you will receive his full-fledged support. Because in the very previous verse to Romans chapter 8:32, in verse 31, if God is for us, who can be against us? If God is for us, who can be against us? The direct implication, the way that's worded in the original language is, it anticipates a no answer. No one can be against you if God is on your side. And what we've seen is that God is on our side. He is fighting for us. That's why he sent Jesus. That's why he's working with us. That's why he's pursued us. Jesus came to you so you would come to him. God didn't hide himself behind a whole bunch of rules and cover charge to get to. He put himself out there through Jesus, so all we would have to do is believe. Not live a perfect life, not pay a whole bunch of money, not say any special magic words, but simply believe, just like you're believing that green pew will hold you for the rest of our time together. Just believe that Jesus died and rose, and you gain eternity. You gain access to his power and his greatness. And honestly, if you think about it, his great compassion on a massive group of people who at times are actively working against him. Are some of these people trying to convince other people that he does not exist? But God still died for that guy. God still wants that guy to come to Jesus. God still wants that guy to experience heaven. Because for God, his love is for everyone, no matter what your past is like. No matter what you've done. God still loves you and he wants you to embrace him. So that's the question today. Will you follow Jesus? Will you believe in God, in him sending his son, and embrace eternity? Will you live like he did all that?